When will it end? A group of armed protesters say they are prepared to occupy this federal wildlife refuge in southeastern Oregon for as long as it takes. They've told our correspondent it could be days, weeks, perhaps months. In a tweet that has since been deleted, the man leading this group says that they will pack up and leave only after the government gives up control of this land. And this father-son duo, Dwight and Steve Hammonds, until they're set free. Father and son ranchers reported to federal prison yesterday to serve out their sentences for arson on federal land. And even though the Hammonds have distanced themselves from this armed occupation, the protesters say that they are staying put until their demands are met. All of this despite pleas from local authorities to leave.
We came very well prepared. We're in it for the long haul.
You said you were here to help the citizens of Harney County. That help ended when a peaceful protest became an armed occupation. It's time for you to leave our community, go home to your families, and end this peacefully.
With these protesters vowing to stay for the long haul, experts say law enforcement should just wait them out. Others beg to differ. They say it would be a much different story if the occupiers were, say, Muslims, African Americans. My next guest, David Love, just wrote an article addressing that very issue for thegrio.com. David Love, great to see you, sir. Welcome.
Thanks a lot, Brooke. Great to be with you.
Let's get right to it. Let me just read part of what you've written here. You say, flat out, quote, here's a question worth asking right now. What would happen if 150 armed Black Lives Matter protesters occupied a federal building? Go on to write this. If Black Lives Matter protesters were to take over a federal building armed to the teeth with firepower, and they certainly would not do this, they would wind up dead or in prison for life on terrorism charges. So you are calling out the double standard here in Oregon.
Oh, yes, no question. It seems that this country has a double standard. I would say it's a color-coded system when it comes to defining terrorism. Throughout the years, black people have been criminalized. And, it seems that white people, when they have guns, roam around, take over a federal building, it's okay. No need for concern. It seems that law enforcement doesn't really care. But I'd argue that if this group had been black or brown and Muslim, there would be a much different response, actually a violent response.
What about, I can hear the critics of your sort of thesis would be saying, well, hang on a second, these armed protesters in Oregon, yes, they may be armed, they're not destroying property, no one's in imminent danger there. What would your response to them be?
Well, it's good that they're not destroying property, but I believe that terrorism goes far beyond just destroying property. The fact is that they're heavily armed to the teeth. They are in possession of a federal building. It seems like they want something to happen, and I don't think it's a good thing, whatever it is that they expect to happen. So you can't have people just taking over government property with guns and expecting to die or to kill or be killed. I think it's a recipe for disaster.
You mentioned a word a second ago. I had a separate guest on from the Washington Post who would agree with you, and she used the word terrorism. Would you call this terrorism?
Oh, definitely. It's it's not just a matter of violence, but it's the use of force, threatening and intimidating. It's not just an issue of killing people, God forbid, but it's an issue of them being there in a forceful situation. They plan to, they plan to be involved in acts of violence if necessary, and it's clear that these days you have these militia groups, these white militia groups who go around carrying their weapons, and it's not just a matter of making a political statement, but they know that they are instilling fear into the hearts and minds of people, and that's why they're effective. It's because of the threat that they feel that they pose to these people, to the public in general.
The federal government says they're monitoring the FBI. We wait to see how long this thing could go on. David Love with thegrio.com. Thank you for your perspective.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.
Got it. Coming up next.
Hi everybody, my name's Mike. This is my YouTube page. Thanks for tuning in. Alright, so I just kind of have to say something about this because I keep hearing this, oh, these people have privilege because they're white. That's why they're not being attacked by the police, because they're white. I don't see the Black Lives Matter protesters being attacked by the police, okay? Uh, in a minute here, I'm going to show a clip, Rick Santorum talking about the Occupy movement and how, protesters, we have a right to protest, and we have to have room for the protesters, and we have to be patient with them.
I think patience is the appropriate way. I mean, these are folks who have legitimate grievances with the government, just like you can make the argument that the Occupy Wall Street had legitimate grievances about income inequality. And we have room for protesters. We have room for people exercising their rights.
And we have to have room for the protesters, and we have to be patient with them, and that's not what happened with the Occupy people. Okay, the Occupy people, in the proud tradition, the proud American tradition, took to the streets, the proud human tradition, but the proud American tradition took to the streets and used their First Amendment rights to have their voice heard, to demand that their voice be heard. And they stayed in the streets for weeks, and some for months. And they were labeled domestic terrorist. Okay, actually, the Department of Homeland Security labeled them potential domestic terrorist. Okay, potential domestic terrorist in a time of a war on terror. There is no potential about it. You're either with us or you're with the terrorists. They clearly weren't with us, the fucking police state. So they're not potential terrorists, they're terrorists in the view of the powers that be. That's how they were labeled by the Department of Homeland Security. Peaceful protesters, proud Americans, demanding the change they were promised. And they got the shit beat out of them. And they got labeled drug addicts and talking about defecating in the streets and having sex on the sidewalk, and just horrible human beings. And the police would go in and beat the shit out of them. And city after city after city, this was happening. Pepper spraying them, arresting hundreds of them at a time. And laws were passed in city after city after city in America and around the world, I might add. There was no room for this. It was forced to be ended now. It stops now. We make laws against, we rescue all. We take away your freedom to hold your elected representatives accountable in the way that's been done for 1,000 generations. Because that's not where we're at in the 21st century. And you know what? All you Black Lives Matter people must be doing the job of the government and the powers that be and the media, because the media never gave the Occupy Wall Street people this kind of attention. And they never gave the anti-war Iraq war protesters this kind of attention. There was millions of us in the streets. And they would do 5-second fucking news stories where they would shoot across the street, not down the millions of people marching, the tens of thousands of people in the street marching. They'd shoot across the street so it looked like there was 50 or 100 people. 5 seconds. The media is out there marching with the Black Lives Matter people, and they want to go, oh, white privilege. Yeah, the Occupy protesters were so privileged, sleeping on cold sidewalks in the fucking winter for months. Such privilege those people have. Only to get the shit beat out of them by fucking rotten pigs. Only to get shit on by this president who promised if the people go into the street, I'll be right there with them, standing next to them. He labeled them terrorists. Yeah, poor Black Lives Matter people. It's so unfair. Look how unfair it is with these Oregon. Oh, what if the armed Oregon protesters were black or Muslim? Get over yourself. This is an oppressive government to all of us. It's a police state to all of us. If all lives don't matter, then none of them do. Dumbasses. Thank you for your continued support. My name's Mike. This is my YouTube page, doing a fundraiser. And I don't have a problem with the Black Lives Matter. I love protesters. I have a problem with people saying, it's so unfair. Yes, it's unfair to all of us. If you're not an elitist, rich, fucking cunt. Not that that's who I want to be. But unless you have the money, you get treated like a slave. Okay? That's the fact. It doesn't matter what color your skin is. If you don't have the money, you get treated like a slave. Welcome to the 21st century. Again, thank you for your continued support. My name is Mike. It's my YouTube page. I hope that you find something of value here. Doing a fundraiser. It's easy to make a donation at moxnews.com. Please go there now. A little tip would be nice today. Thanks again. Wednesday, this word's going to end. Stay cool till that day.
28 days, 4 weeks from right now, we will get the poll that really blows every other poll you've heard of so far. We're talking about the Iowa caucuses. Their first official tally showing which presidential candidates are leading in the race for the nominations. Rick Santorum is pushing himself big time in the state with this new TV ad. But take note of who you see in the first 10 seconds.
I like green eggs and ham.
Ted Cruz is wonderful at reading children's fairy tales on the Senate floor.
Sam, I am.
Rick Santorum spent his time in the Senate a little differently. 8 years on the Senate Armed Services Committee, helping to modernize today's Army to better be prepared for today's threats. Santorum also wrote and passed tough laws, putting harsh sanctions on Iran. And for more than a decade, Rick Santorum has been a leader taking on radical Islam.
Not all Muslims are jihadists, and no one would say that. But the reality is, all jihadists are Muslims.
You want someone to read one hell of a bedtime story? Ted Cruz is your guy. If you want to protect America and defeat ISIS, Rick Santorum's your president, because serious times need serious people.
I'm Rick Santorum, and I approve this message.
All right, here he is, Republican presidential candidate Rick Santorum. Senator, great to see you. Welcome back.
Thank you, Rick. Good to be with you.
All right, so of everyone you could have chosen to take on, to hit in this ad, you chose the Texas senator there. Tell me why.
Well, I think the contrast is the greatest. I mean, there's someone who really has a couple of years of Senate experience before he announced he ran for president. I think the race right now is really coming down to who's going to keep us safe, who's the president that you can trust. Number one, to take on the radicals that we're fighting up against. But number two, just as importantly as Republicans, who can take on a former Secretary of State, former First Lady, someone who's really experienced in this area and has the bona fides to get up there and go toe-to-toe so we can win this election. So it's not just what you can do as president, but how you get to be president. And experience is an important thing.
You point out the experience word multiple times, and you pointed out in this ad in all your years in the Senate working for the people, but it seems in this particular race, experience is backfiring.
I know.
When you look at how well the Trumps and even Senator Cruz is doing.
For now. No, you look
but
at,
it's been going on that way for months and months.
It has, and I keep going back to 4 years ago. 75% of Iowans made up their mind the last month, 50% in the last week, and I think a lot of that, when I look at it from 4 years ago, a lot of that was just people going through the process of really analyzing all the candidates, and they get serious about it at the end. I mean, now you even heard some of the other candidates today talk about entertainer-in-chief, and it is more of an entertainment phase of the campaign. Who's interesting?
Donald Trump for folks who haven't caught
all
it.
the other candidates. I mean, who's sort of the interesting personality? Who's the interesting character? I mean, we saw a lot of people already in this campaign rise and fall and sort of have their moment. And I think in the end, what Iowans have proven to do over the past is really get serious about who's the right person on the issue, who has the experience, who's someone we can trust, who's someone who's authentic. And I think that's why we put the ad up, because it's time to get serious about who you want your presidential candidate to be. It's time to look about who's the right person to be president, not just who potentially is entertaining.
On that, you bring up the entertainer-in-chief. That was both Marco Rubio and Chris Christie, who happened to use the same turn of phrase, referring to Mr. Trump as an entertainer-in-chief.
Right.
Would you agree with them? And could he be the next person you take on in an ad? Would you go there?
I would say that you look at who is being rewarded in the early phases of the campaign. It's the interesting personalities. It's the
you don't want to say his name, do you?
Well, I mean, because it's not just Trump. I mean, I think others. I mean, Ben Carson was rewarded. Carly Fiorina. There are others who have had their moment and not proven to be able to hold on to that moment. I give Trump credit, the fact that he has been able to hold on to a lot of those votes. But again, I don't think we've gone through the phase of the campaign where people have gotten to the brass tacks, and that's why we decided to run this ad now, just to get people, okay, it's serious time. It's time to get serious about who the candidate's going to be and who's really prepared to do this job.
Bill Clinton today, out solo on the trail in New Hampshire, obviously stumping for his wife. And I'm sure you've seen all this that Donald Trump has said about him, and bringing up his past improprieties and saying absolutely it's fair game on the trail from what happened some moons ago. Do you think it's fair game to go there and bring up Monica Lewinsky and everything else?
I think in his circumstance, he thinks it is, because he's being attacked as a sexist and the like, and so he's saying, well, it's pot calling the kettle black.
Is it pertinent in the 2016 race?
Well, I don't think either attack is a relevant attack. That's why I ran an ad on national security and talked about what the President of the United States job really is to keep us safe, and that's the first and foremost thing that we need to be worried about. And we need someone who the enemy fears and our allies trust and the American people can rely upon. And all of these other peripheral things. That's what you get into when you aren't having serious discussions about serious issues.
Okay. Speaking of a serious issue, we've been watching what's been happening in Oregon.
Yeah.
The armed militia, these protesters hunkering down in this federal building, an issue that goes back for years over federal land. What do you think of these militia members?
I certainly don't like the tactics they're using, but then I didn't like the tactics that Occupy Wall Street was using. And they were taking over land, city land and some government land, and occupying that for quite some period of time. And the way
these guys are armed.
Well, armed or not armed, no one's firing any shots, no one's threatening to shoot anybody. This is a situation that has to be handled just like, unfortunately, they had to handle the Occupy Wall Street, which is you sit down, negotiate, you don't want to spark a confrontation. We have no idea what the Occupy people had and what they were willing to do to hurt and confront police. It could have been a volatile situation, and it was avoided by patience.
If you were president, how would you handle it?
I think patience is the appropriate way. I mean, these are folks who have legitimate grievances with the government, just like you can make the argument that the Occupy Wall Street had legitimate grievances about income inequality. And we have room for protesters. We have room for people exercising their rights. At the same time, there are consequences that have to be paid for people who do break the law, and that's where the negotiation process. But going through a situation where someone is going to get hurt because they're protesting their government and the government's activity, that's not a good solution.
Okay. Senator, thank you.
All right, Brooke.
Thank you. I
bet.
appreciate it. A quick reminder, President Obama will be joining Anderson Cooper this Thursday for a live town hall on violence in America. That is Thursday night, 8 o'clock Eastern here on CNN.
When I've been at rallies in Washington, D.C.
Having them actually married in one household and having like that. They may not have it tonight.
I wanna walk like you, talk like you too. You see it's true. We hate like me. Can learn to be human too. Don't try to kid me, man, cuz don't get me in a stew. What I desire is man's red fire, so I can be like you. Give me the secret, man, cuz just clue me into what to do. Give me the power of man's red fire, make my dreams come true. I wanna be like you. I wanna walk like you, talk like you too. You'll see it's true. In names like me, can learn to be human too. I like the mannerism.
Go to bed! I live here! I live here! You can't get off my lawn! Don't stop. She was on a piece of
Set up twins. No one will know where the man cub ends and orangutan begins. We're not even bananas. I won't feel them with my feet. 'Cause I'll become a man cub.